It's amusing to me to see when people make videos presuming to know the karma of an entire people group based on a piece of the past, only experienced or perpetuated by small fractions of them. So this video is to blast that shit right out of the water. There's a misunderstanding of what karma is, especially in the West. Karma is not what comes around goes around. Karma is the mind. Karma is the impressions in consciousness born of experience. And these impressions have bearing on action to the extent that thought precedes action, so long as the ignorance of unconscious body identification persists. Ironically, the people who presume to know the karma of entire races are the deepest in that unconsciousness, in that they are identified with their form and think it gives them a special status, despite ample evidence that all people groups hugely overlap in characteristics and historical experiences in a generic sense. They think they have special karma by virtue of the group into which they were born, but we can clearly see that karma varies wildly between individuals within groups. But they don't even understand what karma is. They just think it's what comes around goes around. They mistake the fate of individuals and subsets with that of the whole. If one were to say there was a karma for a particular group, it would not have to do with bloodline, but rather the programming that has been installed between their ears, either by themselves or by another group that wants to cultivate in them something for the purposes of acting against, say, another group. Karma is the mind, not the bloodline. Some people groups do in fact have a highly uniform mindset based on some codified belief system into which they were all indoctrinated from an early age, and therefore, yes, to the extent that formations of mind are closer to uniform in such indoctrinated and insular groups, they do share a karma, but it's not based on bloodline. It's based on what karma actually is. Again, that is impressions in consciousness, the mind, which sets the vibrational level of the energy body when there is unconscious body and mind identification. The idea of being spiritually special by virtue of race is extremely common among racial identitarians, but also it's common among the aforementioned groups that share a very particular view of the world by virtue of the narrative they have systematically installed into their young, or have had systematically installed into their young through media and institutions controlled by other groups who want to program them for some malign purpose against an enemy. Ironically, the programming within them says that their suffering is so special that it warrants karmic justice against entire bloodlines. It's itself, that very programming is itself karma that brings them into folly and misfortune. We see it today. The groups that hold the grudges are either perpetrators of heinous acts of brutality or are held back greatly by the racial animus that's installed within them through media and institutions. But the fact is that entire races don't participate in the interactions that are pointed to as the fuck around stages for which the supposed find out to come is based. It's subsets, tiny subsets of victims and tiny subsets of perpetrators. And additionally, if we look at history, we see that the offenses and misfortunes of people groups are not unique. There's no group that is the only to suffer a particular fate. It's just a narcissism that makes them believe that. Nor is there one group that is the only to inflict harm on others. And to believe the suffering of one's group is unique, it's just an expression of narcissism. And this bears out if you examine the character of such people who make these assertions that they are narcissistic and grandiose individuals, even within their group. They tend not to be enlightened. In fact, they can't be enlightened, but rather extremely unconscious and mind identified and body identified. To become conscious is to lose unconscious identification with both personal and group history, and by virtue of this, to experience an ascension of the energy body, both in vibration and position, as well as the direction of flow, which would be upward rather than downward in the case of the enlightened. And this state of being reveals the folly of advocating for superficial and impermanent things. Enlightenment yields the fruit of the spirit, and it's evidenced in the person's outward expression. To think the suffering of one's group is special is to believe that one's group is special. And again, this is narcissism. This is the product of spiritual inversion. So, for example, genocide level events such as the Celtic Holocaust at the hands of the Romans, or the Armenian genocide at the hands of the Turks, or the genocide of the Tutsis at the hands of the Hutus are just examples. But there are countless people groups that have been wiped out over the centuries, and there's nobody seeking justice for them or the aforementioned groups really. not just genocide, but also slavery, such as the enslavement of various Europeans at the hands of Middle Eastern people. Nobody's calling for some kind of justice for that. I've never seen anyone point to these things and suggest that there's some impending karmic comeuppance for them. Only certain groups make this assertion or have this assertion made about them. And this is likely because there's an opportunity to profit from it, to advance one's agenda, or to seek revenge against another group. I take the speculations of identitarians to be the rantings of narcissistic individuals. There's a misunderstanding of karma. Like if you look at the FAFO, this popular saying nowadays, they get these stages reversed in terms of karma. Like if somebody does something to you individually and you think, oh, they're going to get theirs, they're going to get the karma for that, you're actually putting things out of balance again. You see, because the thing that was done was their karma, which was actually the balancing event, and to seek vengeance is what puts it back out of balance. So misfortunes are in fact the settling of accounts and not the creation of them. To get revenge puts things out of balance again, which perpetuates the forever cycle of bloodletting and samsara, the wheel of death and rebirth. You can't get off this wheel if you're constantly seeking some account receivable called grievance to be paid off through vengeance, which itself will be avenged, continuing the cycle. You see, the fuck around part of the FAFO is unseen by the person who presumes that somebody else's fuck around isn't their own find out. So like if your life sucks, it doesn't create a karmic debt for somebody else. That suckage of life is your karma. It's the vibrational level of your jiva, and to insist that somebody else should pay a price for the shittiness of one's life just maintains that ignorance. It keeps them on the wheel of samsara, chasing some account receivable, the carry cost of which is the peace that surpasses all understanding. They stay in reaction to what the mind does based on their identification with body and mind. In an earlier video and a couple others, I've referred to this fistula that we are in the block universe. So there are tunnels through the block universe, the space within which is the awareness that perceives the walls of it, which are the body, mind, and energy body. But the space is you, that which is aware but cannot appear in awareness. Therefore, it's not a thing that can be harmed and is therefore not something for which to fear. And in that lack of fear is freedom, that realization of the non-self nature of the fistula's walls. That's liberation. So long as there is body identification, the contents of the mind are like teeth on a gear that will turn the emotions and disturb the energy body, and thus the physical body. And when the ignorance of body identification is dispelled, the gears of the mind are stripped of their teeth, and despite the wheels turning, there being thoughts, they're no longer able to gain purchase on the emotions, and therefore the energy body. And thus the contents of the mind no longer steer the destiny as they do in unconsciousness, in the uninstructed worldlings. So the person who sits around trying to collect a karmic debt against the object of their racial animus continues to suffer in the wheel of samsara. There's no liberation in that. They can't be free until they no longer react to the misfortunes of being alive. But this absence of reaction is not a function of moment-to-moment discipline, of resisting the urge to act despite the screaming of the mind. No. It's a lack of reacting due to a lack of automatic believing in being the physical or conceptual self, the conceptual subject of thoughts and circumstance. This stillness in the face of phenomena is the hallmark of true insight, which appears in the absence of ignorance. So this fistula, this passage through which the assemblage point moves through the block universe, it's the soil into which we as jivas are buried as seeds. Some passages are bereft of events that expose the non-self nature of mind and body, and are thus unfruitful from a spiritual perspective, leaving the expression of consciousness closer to the NPC side of the scale, which is to have awareness so constricted by the distorted reactions to phenomena that there is perpetual suffering and neediness. The hungry ghost is the NPC. Like a clogged artery. It's a constricted state of consciousness. The identification with that seed, the assemblage point that's planted in the block universe, has to die before it can grow and give rise to a blossoming energy body. It's like you have to die before you die. And still that energy body is only something to be observed by what you are, which is the awareness in which it appears. So the jiva persists in moving through the block universe, being triggered by both events and ideas about them, along with speculations about the future. Through the dispelling of ignorance, there's no more inner reaction to what happens, and then the energy body begins to ascend, both in vibration and position. and direction of flow, upward rather than down. And this is the beginning of the end of suffering and the progression into another stage of being, that of being free from the karma of the body. You never see liberated beings insisting that somebody has a karmic debt simply by virtue of their bloodline. The Buddha spoke explicitly on the fallacy of belief in the specialness of bloodline as either a qualifier for enlightenment or a disqualifier. The circumstance into which one is born is an expression of the energy body's vibrational level, which is the product of how the mind is reacted to. And these vibrational levels vary greatly between individuals within people groups. There's no uniform vibration. There's no uniform vibrational level based simply on the provenance of the flesh. It is rather the provenance of the mind and the ignorance that takes it to be a self along with the body. So when you leave the body, the vibrational level of your jiva stratifies within the astral realm based on what was held in mind. And then the next life into which it's born is drawn based on frequency to the spark of life being made through baby making by individuals of the average vibrational level that matches that jiva, which then enters that body in a new birth. So the one at whom the finger is pointed for having a good life, to say to them, oh, they're going to get their karma, their bad karma, it's presumption based on ignorance of how karma actually works. The reaping of karma is confused with the sowing of it from the perspective of ignorance. The targets of such assertions are more likely the reincarnations of the victims than the victimizer. The victims of today are more likely the perpetrators in previous lives who are getting their karma. But that's unseen due to the hidden nature of past lives and the fallacy of belief that karma follows the bloodline and not the condition of the energy body based on the mind that preceded it in the past life. People follow the bloodline ignorantly, not karma. Karma is the subtle, bloodline is the gross. The bloodline is the product of karma that preceded it, not the other way around. Someone who sits there looking at the ledger of accounts or karmic accounts receivable and obsessing over it and insisting that the object of their racial animus is going to get theirs, and they can never be free. If you look at such individuals, they're miserable, they're bound by their need for revenge. It keeps them on the wheel of samsara, going and going. None of us will be free unless we can get over our racial butt hurt. That's all for now.